Hello, my lovelies. I think we're going live any minute. Just at the time my cat's choosing to really play with the blind and cause trouble. But hey, so welcome. It feels like a while since we have done a live show together. So if you're here, I'm delighted that you have joined us. This is the Yoga Teacher Collaborative podcast, filmed live into the Yoga Teacher Collaborative Facebook group. My name is Laura Green. I am a yoga teacher and a business mentor for yoga teachers. Today's session is a little bit different. It's a short session just designed to give you a little bit of inspiration and share a little bit of a story from my last week, and I hope that it inspires your teaching. Now, I have just come back from teaching a week-long winter soul immersion retreat. This is the first winter retreat abroad I've ever done. It was deep in an ancient forest, and we were on a peninsula island. So you traveled through this pine forest a long way off the road until you arrived in this totally secluded retreat center that was surrounded on all sides by a beautiful lake. I was fortunate to take 16 lovely students with me for a week of deep diving into the soul. And I've been teaching for 15 years. I've been running retreats abroad for 10 years, and every retreat is different. Every retreat has its magic, its moments, its highlights. But this retreat was a real standout retreat for me due to the depth and the power of the yoga, the meditation, and the other workshops that we did, and quite what healing work we were all able to do. And yes, the yoga, the meditation, the workshops, we had a Wim Hof experience, we had an amazing sauna, we had a fabulous cacao ceremony, we had a 2-hour, 20-minute sound bath, we had 8 different local guest facilitators come in, which is something I love to do on retreat. Just a side note here is it really helps you put money into the local community where you're hosting that retreat. So we had 8 different people, from our massage therapist, our hiking guide, our guest facilitators come in, and all of that shared its wonders. But what was most profound from the week was the location. And it was the absolute stillness and silence. And that is what I really want to talk to you about today, is how we can interweave more space for stillness and silence within our yoga by trusting simplicity, trusting doing less ourselves as teachers, and also inspiring our students to do less. We are so overstimulated. Even if you yourself have managed to cultivate a quiet home environment, a quiet life, still the world we inhabit is full of stimulation. It is noisy, it is bright, it is loud, and it is fast. And that can come into a collective psyche that we are all very overstimulated, processing so much visual detail, processing so much noise, processing so much information all of the time. And then our minds wearing through our to-do lists, us running through our days, ticking things off, that I really think we are in a world where everybody is on cruise control set at 90 miles an hour. And one of the true gifts of yoga, if we allow it, is to embrace stillness, simplicity, silence, lingering, and being in the pause. But this can take a real confidence from you as a yoga teacher, because sometimes that is requiring us to teach what our students need, not necessarily what they want. We can get very addicted to the speed, to the overwork, to the overstimulus, to the over-efforting, that this can really easily flow into how people practice yoga and how people teach yoga. Now, there is definitely a place for challenging yoga. There is definitely a place for yoga practices that are physically dynamic. They can help us to realize that we are stronger than we know. They can help us to cultivate a physical strength, a mental strength, a deep resilience. There is 100% place for physically challenging yoga. I'm not knocking that at all. But there is definitely more that we need to do to cultivate yoga classes that are simple, spacious, quiet, still, calm, and relaxing. And I sometimes think that takes more skill from you as the teacher, because often your students come in with an expectation of the physical challenge, an expectation set by mass media that yoga is an exercise form. People can come in expecting that. And how do we meet our students at their expectations, but also inspire them to do less, to trust simplicity, to know that yoga poses do not need you to give 100%, and actually your yoga asana can often support you more if you back it off. So part of that is understanding that many people come to yoga at first with the mindset of challenge and efforting. We live in a world where we think we have to give 100%, that we have to give our best all the time, that we must stay busy, that we must earn our worth by giving 100%. And people come into yoga with that because that is either a sports mindset and they think they're coming into an exercise class, or it's just a mindset they've cultivated in a workplace. So how do we let people know from the very beginning that it is so okay to give their minimum, that it is so okay to back off, that it is so okay to do less, and then to actually experience how through doing less they can still get deep benefits. One of the most, coming back to my story of the retreat, from 15 years of teaching yoga, I have never sensed such silence and stillness in Shavasana. The Shavasanas were just like a whole room had been covered in a blanket of snow. And that was from the stillness and the silence that we were held in. On one of the evenings, my guests went to bed and it was about 11:30 at night, and I just needed a moment to decompress and have some time for me. So it was 11:30, it was dark, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go for a little walk into the woods. And I walked into the woods, I walked down to the lake, and I was standing by the lake in the pitch black dark in the night. There wasn't a single human sound, all my guests were asleep. There wasn't a single sound of an animal. There wasn't the birds, they had gone to sleep. There wasn't even an owl, there wasn't a cricket. You know, it being cold, it was about -3 at night. Everything was asleep. And on this one night, there wasn't even a rustle of the wind in the tops of the pine trees. There wasn't even a ripple from the lake. And I think it was the first time for an extended period that I was really able to listen to the sound of silence. And I think that sound of silence might have been the most profound sound that I have ever learned. And what is that? Silence is the absence of sound and something that we can lean into. Now, we can't cultivate that silence in our yoga classes back home. There is always noise outside of our control, but yoga has the practice of pratyahara. Now, pratyahara is about withdrawing the senses inwards, and this is a gradual process. And we all know it, but really guiding your students gradually through that. From yes, noticing the sounds outside the room and actually tuning in to listen to them. When we listen, there is a deep present moment awareness. And then imagining that we have a volume control and just dialing down the volume on those sounds outside of the room. Sure, you've done this so many times before. Then bringing into the room, noticing maybe the sounds. Yes, if you are using music, you can still teach pratyahara and use music because you're withdrawing the senses inwards then just to the room, to the sounds in the room. It is a gradual process. This week particularly, I used one long looping playlist, which is an hour long. It's a binaural beats track, so there's no lyrics. Lyrics obviously stimulate story in the mind. So if you can strip your playlist, if you use music, back to no lyrics, back to something where it's a continual track, so there isn't that pause and something that kind of just fades into the background, that really does help your students with pratyahara to come in. It's almost like the playlist is like the snow that blankets out the outer sound. And then from that, get them to notice the sounds of the students and get them to then come closer. And of course, the gateway, noticing the sound of your own breath. And then following that awareness of the breath inwards. One of the great ways to come into kind of the feeling of stillness and silence and pratyahara is to follow the feeling and the sound of the breath from noticeable to not noticeable. So if you think, you can feel your breath as it enters and exits your nostrils. You can feel your breath as it rises through the nasal area. Then you can feel the breath as it expands in your chest and your diaphragm moves. But where is the point where you lose the sense of your breath, when you can't feel it? Then following that in from obvious to subtle is like leaning into the absence of sound in silence, drawing our students in. Now, this week we had on retreat last week, deep healing was done because we need stillness and silence to first of all start to notice our thoughts and our feelings. And this is one of the main reasons why people are scared of stillness and silence, why our students at first can be resistant. And I'll say to my students, it's okay if you find the beginning of this practice boring. We are learning to slow down. We are learning to be less distracted, less stimulated. And at first, the mind and the body is going to have resistance to that. It's okay. Talk to that challenge. Then when they see the challenge coming, just like, a challenge of holding a headstand, they can train through the challenge. So at first, when your students practice pratyahara, this withdrawal into stillness and silence, of course, the loudest thing next is our thoughts and our emotions. And yes, both of those can be challenging to sit with. But by keeping ourselves perpetually overstimulated, by pacifying your students with overly complicated yoga poses, overly complicated sequences, overly challenging classes, we're perpetuating them staying at the surface, not having the pause to go in and be with their thoughts and their feelings and do that healing work. So we owe it to yoga, we owe it to our students to teach them through the process of pratyahara, just as you guide them through the process of, say, a downward facing dog, identifying the challenges. So yes, at first, the mind might be a noisy place to be. The emotions might be more powerfully felt, but trust the tools of yoga, the alchemy of breath and movement, that with practice will begin to quieten and sort through and bring clarity to the thoughts, cleanse and heal some of the emotions. So then give the tools of the full yogic breath, the tools of diaphragmatic belly breathing, the tools of the Brahmari bee breath, the tools of mantra, the tools of simple breath and movement connection. the tools of nervous system regulation through simple neck stretches that affect the vagus nerve, etc., etc. And then let your students use the tools in class and then give them points to come back and notice. How is the mind now? How are the feelings now? What is flowing through you? And continue that journey through pratyahara, this withdrawal inwards. So what are some of the tools that might help you with this? Speaking a little less as a yoga teacher. Our students, if they are listening to us, are not listening to themselves. Some students are very good at tuning us out, especially once they've been coming to a class for a while, they know where you're going, they can tune you out, but not everyone. So think about every word you're saying that every student is listening to and then translating, and making sure that there is space for them to be listening to themselves and not just listening to you. So what is a practical way you can do this? On teacher training, I get my students to explore primary cues and secondary cues. Primary cues are the bare minimum you can say to instruct somebody into an asana or a breath practice. The bare minimum you can say. Warrior 2. Step your foot to the hands. Walk it between the hands. Straighten your back leg. Drop the back foot to 90 degrees. Rise up and open warrior 2. Front knee bent. Arms extended. Gaze over the front hand. Now really starting to strip back those words. Take out the filler words. In a moment, we're just about to strip back all of the fillers and give your primary cues using as fewer words as possible so people can just come up into the basic shape. Give pauses between the cue and someone translating it. Step your right foot forwards. Pause. Straighten your back leg. Pause. Rise up, warrior 2. Pause. Bend the front knee. And those pauses between you and the instruction, that's starting to drip in a little bit of space where the student can then translate and respond. Then give a longer pause. And then decide whether it's appropriate to layer in a secondary cue. You do not have to fill all of the silence. You can simply say, holding here for 3 cycles of breath, and be confident enough to hold the silence. Because it's not about us. It's about that internal journey the student is having. So hold the silence. Or, as and when appropriate, drip in secondary cues. Secondary cues are golden nuggets that are adding depth to the experience. They might be a reminder of the theme. They might be a reminder of the benefits of the pose. They might be a nuanced technique alignment pointer. But they come with thought, and they're not just fillers. So really cleaning up your primary cues. Cue, leave a beat. Cue, leave a beat. Be okay to leave students in silence. You don't have to fill the silence. Just hold it. I'm going to be here for 3 more cycles of breath. Okay. And then skillfully layer in secondary cues. Educate your students on pratyahara, on the journey of stillness, silence, simplicity, doing less, ease. Then give them spaces to experience what you're educating them on. Trust yourself. I don't have really styles when I teach. I think if you were still to really Google, it would probably say vinyasa. But my students know my classes don't have a style. Yes, I have a passion for flow, but my classes don't have a style. So that means some weeks might be more challenging. Some weeks might be more meditation and philosophy. Some weeks might be really gentle. Like, I don't really even think we stood up in class this week. And I trust myself and they trust me. That they might come desiring more of a physical workout today. oh, but Laura's teaching a gentle class. There is this sense of trust that might be not what they want, but it's what they need, and they'll feel better at the end. So you can guide your students through that. I know you might have been expecting a more challenging class today, but I've noticed that many of my students are quite tired at the moment. We're still in winter, and we're going to take a more gentle class. I know for some of you this will be like taking medicine, but trust me, it's good for us. So cultivate that trust. If you've offering a vinyasa class and all of a sudden you're going to do an hour's lying down, trust yourself that that's okay. Trust that your students trust you, and tell them why you're doing it. Release attachment to style. That really helps. Considering the difference between what your students want and what they need. And then when it comes into sequences, try stripping back your sequences. When sequences are long, it keeps your students at the surface, not pratyahara, not withdrawing in, because they're having to concentrate on where's this flow going next. Okay? Then you're trying to remember it for the next side as well. So I really encourage, and it's a big thing on my teacher training, that sequences are no more than 1 to 3 poses. Occasionally, if it's say like warrior 2 and there's like a sneaky little reverse warrior in there, like a bonus transition, they might sneak slightly longer to 4, or maybe there's just a change of arm variation. But basic foundational poses, no more than 1 to 3 in a sequence, 80% of the time. 20% of the time you do something different, that's absolutely, totally okay. But just strip your sequences back, because then your students can practice pratyahara. Trusting that they can remember the sequence, that it's nice and simple, that they're not having to overly listen, and they can go within. And with that, with complicated creative sequences, there is a huge difference between what feels good for you to flow from and what is good when you're teaching. I know a lot of yoga teachers who are dancers, and I find they obviously attract a lot of dancers who like that flow, but sometimes I find their classes way too creative. And I'm like, yeah, that might have been nice to flow through on your own, but as a student, I'm really having to listen to you going, oh, this is creative, therefore it's different, therefore where are we going, therefore I'm with you. I'm not pratyahara withdrawn into me. Now, of course, I'm not saying you can't be creative, but as your default every week, trust simplicity, trust basic sequences, trust repetition that is allowing your students to withdraw from hanging on to your every word and constantly looking at you. That's a real key. If you notice your students are really having to look at you, then there's not pratyahara. If your students are able to keep their gaze on their mat or even close their eyes, you know they're in pratyahara and that they are able to follow you because it's not complicated. Trust repetition in your sequences. It's so okay to do a flow more than once. In fact, I absolutely love to do this. On the retreat I just had, we had a basic sequence. It was like half sun salutation into a low lunge, into like a twisted lunge, downward facing dog, plank cobra, and step forwards. And we did that same sequence almost every day. Yes, there were other sequences as well, but we kept this base sequence so that every day they had moments where they could really flow on their own and connect with the philosophy and the spirituality and the energy of the practice. Half sun salutations. Give your students the opportunity to repeat them on their own without you. So where you can, start building your classes up to moments where they can do sequences without you. I'm going to guide you through this movement meditation twice, and then we're going to do it on our own. I'm going to guide you through this half salutation twice, and then you're going to repeat it on your own. I'm going to guide you through this simple low lunge sequence twice, and then we're going to do it on our own. And again, educate. Yes, at first it might feel hard for you to do it without my instruction. Trust yourself, withdraw in, listen. If you do a different pose, or just following the needs of your body today. So give your students a place where they can do flows without you. And yeah, repeat yoga poses. Do warrior two twice. The first time you can be giving the instruction. The second time you can allow your students to just be in it, connecting with themselves in stillness, silence, and simplicity. Okay. And feel free to repeat a class week by week, have one lesson plan that you do for 4 weeks. So I would really love you to explore some of this in an upcoming lesson. You could maybe explore simplicity with your students, stripping the sequences back, stripping the instruction back. You could explore stillness with your students. A wonderful way to explore stillness is the pauses between the breaths, softening into the yoga poses, and you can explore silence. You can explore that pratyahara with drawing the sound in, listening to the breath, and then listen to the kumbhaka, the pause between the breaths, and let that represent silence. One of the things I loved doing this week in class was really working on the pauses between the breaths, feeling those as a moment of silence, and then in flowing yoga poses, like moving the knees side to side in, reclining or moving the arms, the pause in the movement being with the pause in the breath. So the pause in the movement was stillness, the pause in the breath was silence. And even though I couldn't take my students all the way to a forest this week like I did the week before, the depth of the shavasana was very similar to what I experienced on retreat. We were able to create that stillness, silence, simplicity, to withdraw in, to go into the depths of ourselves. I just noticed a question come up in the comments. Agatha, do you always plan your sequences ahead and sometimes just go with basic repetitive sequences and add only some new elements? Agatha, I always lesson plan. 100%, always lesson plan. I've probably got, here's a little book next to me called Yoga Lesson Plans. I got this printed, or someone else got it printed for me at the printers, and yeah, I always lesson plan. I've been teaching for 15 years and I always lesson plan. Now, that's no judgment if somebody doesn't, but it makes me a better teacher because my head is in the room and not in my sequence. And then I would say a class goes about 60% in flow with my lesson plan. So I plan and then I adapt and go with what's happening in the room in the moment. But if I haven't planned, I am not able to adapt and be with my students in the moment. Now that is a reflection on my skill set. Other people are different. But if I haven't planned, I feel like 50% of my brain is occupied with where am I going? What did I do? What's on the next side? So when I plan and have my lesson plan next to me, it frees my brain and my heart and my soul and my body to be fully in the room with my students, to be more responsive and adapt the plan as I go. Okay, my lovelies. So thank you so much for joining me today. Remember, you can catch all of the replays on Spotify on the Yoga Teacher Collaborative podcast, and we will be back next week. It's really nice to be with you live again. Thank you, my loves. Bye for now.